Hey guys, welcome back to another edition of Radio 815, the podcast dedicated to examining the work of writer director J.J. Abrams. I'm your host for this time around. My name is Marcelo Inostroza, joined as always by my fellow co-host, Matt Crandall. And on today's edition of the show, we will take a look at the 2012 series Alcatraz. And today we'll be talking about the very first episode, just entitled The Pilot. So, Matt, I have a question for you. Welcome to The Rock.
Welcome to The Rock. Losers always whine about their best. Not that Alcatraz, but here we are in 2012. Fox wanted another bad robot show. Fringe was hot. Lost had just ended. They wanted something to throw on. Along comes Alcatraz, produced by J.J. Abrams, Brian Burke, and Bad Robot, written and created by Elizabeth Sarnoff, Stephen Lillian, and Brian Winbrandt. And on paper, this should have been an absolute slam dunk, because basically they say, hey, you know what was one of Fox's biggest hits? Prison Break. You know what's their other biggest hit? X-Files and Fringe. What if we took those shows and rolled them into one and added flashbacks just like Lost? So they're like, Fringe, Prison Break, Lost, cram it together into one show. It's Alcatraz. Here it is. And for some reason, it didn't really take off because it only lasted one 13-episode season. The ratings just weren't there. But if you just want like a fun mystery of the week kind of show, this one's got a top-notch cast. So when I heard about this show, I was like, okay, the concept sounds cool. I was not familiar with Sarah Jones, who is the lead of the show, who plays Detective Rebecca Madsen, but obviously as a Jurassic Park guy through and through, Sam Neill as kind of the not quite the Walter Bishop of the show, but the elder statesman of the show. I'm like, all right, Sam Neill, you have my attention. Jorge Garcia, we're throwing Hurley in here as an Alcatraz expert / dude who runs a comic book store. I'm like, all right, I am up for this. And then we added, character actors like Ray Forster and some other people who pop up that on paper, I was like, slam dunk. And even this first episode does a very good job of selling the concept, which, is fairly easy. It's modern day. We flash back. We see that right before Alcatraz was going to close, a bunch of the inmates disappeared, never to be heard from again until now. And they are reappearing. And of course, there's a bigger mystery about where have they been? Why are they coming back? Who is in charge of this? And a few twists and turns that maybe some people in our show are related to people who might be part of the bad guys. How did you feel about the concept before you tuned in to watch it?
I really like the concept because, like Matt stated, this show was a machination of a bunch of shows that I loved. Lost, Prison Break, and Fringe. As a matter of fact, to take the Fringe comparisons even further, the score of this pilot sounds so much like Giacchino that I was like, did he do the fucking music for the show? Because every note sounded like a rejected score from Fringe.
Obviously, yeah, this is before Giacchino is Mr. Movie, right? So this is still when Giacchino is Mr. TV, and more specifically, Mr. Bad Robot on TV. So he does do the main themes, although as JJ is wont to do, the closing credits theme is JJ, and that's because this doesn't have an opening credits, whereas, usually JJ always does the opening credits music. This show just cuts to a title card that says Alcatraz and has some, prison cells slamming shut noises that it does. But much like Fringe, every time they go to a commercial, they cut to the words Alcatraz. Like Fringe would always cut to a thing to let us know it was a commercial break. And so like style wise, it's very in line with Fringe, partly even they shot this, Vancouver again is standing in for San Francisco. Just like on Fringe, it was Vancouver for a while, and it still feels, pretty accurate. Like when we're all around Alcatraz and stuff, it feels a little bit different. And I like we do start with a scenario that we don't really know what's going on, where it's kind of an eye roll moment, and I kind of dug it, which is we see Madsen and her partner like chasing down a perp, and the dude jumps from a rooftop to another rooftop, and then in like a very Mission Impossible way, somebody doesn't quite make the jump. And there's a moment where like her partner is dangling off the roof, and of course she can't save him, and he plummets to his death. And now this is a few months earlier, and we're seeing that, she's still dealing with the trauma and fallout of this, which gives her some emotional baggage that she has to work through as we go through. And as this goes on, we're going to start to learn that some of these flashbacks like that is her main trauma, but also there's more to it. So I do like that we start to get these breadcrumbs leading to a bigger mystery, which again is kind of the Fringe playbook. We're going to start with a broad concept. We're going to bring you in with the easy to follow story of the week, but we're going to do a few things here and there that might start to add up to something else if we want. Now, of course, this first episode, we spend a lot of time in old Alcatraz before it closed to see our main guy, Jack Sylvain, who's the first one that we follow, who comes back. And he comes back to modern Alcatraz, and his first order of business is to murder the warden from his days in Alcatraz. So we do have flashbacks where we see the warden planting a shiv in his cell and getting him in trouble. And this is where we get, like I said, some character actors pop up. So the guy who's playing the warden, he was on Ozark. For anybody who watched, he was a real pain in Jason Bateman's ass. He played Roy Petty on Ozark. So when he shows up, I'm like, hey, it's dude from Ozark who pokes around too much and gets murdered. And then, Jack Sylvain is another like recognizable face who's been on a bunch of shows. So you see him and you're like, oh, this guy, he was on Castle Rock. Most recently, he was on Last of Us. So like a lot of these people that pop up, you will recognize their face and be like, oh, these guys, reliable character actors. And a lot of them are reliable Canadian guys who just can drop in because these shows are all shot in Canada. But I like that, at first we aren't quite sure what's going on. And Rebecca isn't sure what's going on. Sam Neill shows up acting like a hotshot and says, we're taking over. Get the hell out of here. We don't want your help. And of course, she can't let it go because she's found out that these fingerprints belong to a guy who has been off the grid for 40 years or whatever it is. And so she starts digging into Alcatraz and E.B. Tiller to find out what the real story is here with this warden who's just been murdered. And it's weird because the warden is like 90 years old. So like, why did somebody break in and murder a 90-year-old man? There has to be like a vendetta or something because nothing was really taken. And that leads her to Dr. Diego Soto, played by Jorge Garcia, because he wrote a book about all of the inmates in Alcatraz. And I like that he's not just playing Hurley here. They do give him a little bit of that element because, like I said, his shop sells like comics and stuff as well as the Alcatraz stuff. But he's like a smart guy with a very particular obsession and knowledge base that makes him essential to this team. How did you feel they introduced kind of our main trio and how that dynamic was going to work?
The fact that the writers took time to layer our villain of the week in Jack Sylvain. Jack Sylvain, to me, came off as a criminal that basically got a bad rap because essentially his initial arrest in the 60s was because he tried to rob a convenience store. He was a he was um he was somebody who robbed houses. He was never somebody who committed a violent crime. He had to go to prison to commit a violent crime. So I really thought that the writers did a great job of making Jack Sylvain sympathetic. And during his vendetta, after he came back to our present time to kill the warden or the person that made him suffer the most when he was in Alcatraz, everything that he did when he came back to our present day really looked off to me in some sort of way, because if somebody from the 1960s who was in Alcatraz and in prison suddenly came back to our time period today, he didn't panic at all. He was very focused, and he had a very, very clear vision of what he wanted to do. I wasn't completely happy with that because I would have preferred him to be a little bit more fish out of water rather than being so focused the way it was. Listen, I understand that this is a TV show and you only have X amount of time to tell your story, and you gotta, on TV, you gotta go, 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 go. There's no time for anything extra. But that's one story quirk, the way that they wrote the villain of the pilot and Jack Sylvain, that I didn't particularly like. I do agree with you that the creators of this episode did a great job of telling us what Rebecca's main trauma was and what her main focus was, in the fact that, she lost a partner 3 months ago and now she doesn't want to partner up with somebody. The other thing that the writers of this episode did very, very well is that they layered Rebecca very well, very, very well in this episode. You know exactly what she wants. You know exactly who she is. And she does not fuck around. She reminded me so much of, an FBI agent from Boston. She's, don't get it twisted. She's no Olivia Dunham, but she does have those layers that I really, really appreciated very, very much. Hurley or Dr. Soto was great. It was so lovely watching him again and seeing him play another character who is not Hurley was such a surprise to me. Like when Rebecca and Soto first met, I would have died if Soto would have showed her a comic book and the comic book had a little polar bear on it. I would have lost my goddamn mind. Look, that didn't happen, but I would have lost my mind. Ultimately, I really, really, really liked the way that the writers structured this episode, and the way that there were certain flashbacks that hinted at Sylvain being wrongly imprisoned and being treated like fucking shit in Alcatraz, but there was just these little things that pointed out a larger story, and I like the way that the writers sort of dropped those hats on the ground to push the story forward beyond this episode.
Yeah, I think it makes all the difference that they kind of planted those seeds and found a way to weave them subtly. I also really liked, as you mentioned, we do get that backstory of Sylvain that, Soto tells us, oh yeah, this guy, he was a World War II vet and he got sent to the Rock because he robbed a grocery store. And Madsen's like, how is that a federal crime? And he said they sold stamps, so it counted as robbing a post office, which fucked him for life. And then he went and, became a murderer and got pushed to the edge. So I like that when he comes back, yes, he does do a murder, but we do see in the flashbacks, like, Tiller was especially cruel to him, and us knowing that he was there not for like a major violent crime makes it more sympathetic. Now, when we start to track like what his next moves are going to be, this is where some of your complaints might be addressed slightly, because he's not panicking that he's back. We don't know where he has been or who has given him instruction this whole time that he's been gone. So maybe it's not a surprise to him that he's waking up in 2012 and that things are different. Because after he does Tiller, he goes and does this other murder where he specifically gets this weird key from his victim. So this weird key suggests that there's a bigger mystery at play here, because why would a guy who's been disappeared for 50 years murder someone in their home for a seemingly worthless piece of metal? And I think that has a lot of questions that we're going to need addressing as we go on. And I like when, Hauser agrees to let Madsen kind of like be not part of the team right away, but like he's like, okay, you can go and investigate and like report back. And when her and Soto are investigating, then they do actually come across, they're like, hey, let's go to Alcatraz and figure out what's going on, if there's anything at Alcatraz. And of course, at Alcatraz is where they do find that Hauser, who was just kind of like this random suit who rolled in, he has a big operation actually on Alcatraz. So like Soto has a line like, you built the Bat Cave underneath Alcatraz? Like, what the fuck? And then he's like, okay, I think we'll bring you in. And of course, he has his assistant, who's played by Parminda Nagra, Dr. Lucy Banerjee. And we see that they have like an elaborate lab set up here. A lot more planning went into this than this just being like a random thing that has started on the day that we're entering the story. So I thought that was really interesting, that Hauser has so many resources that we're wondering like, what's the end game here? Because if it's just a bunch of weird ghost guys are going to show up, why so many government resources put to use? Or is it like these ghost guys are going to show up and try and cause an apocalypse or something, right? So I think those flags start slowly getting raised as we go. And I do like that, Sam Neill, being the elder statesman, he agrees to let Soto and Madsen kind of like join the squad. But then he's also really condescending. He's like, run along and play now. And then Madsen's like, yeah, thanks for being a dick about it. And I like that she doesn't put up with his crap. And by the time this ends, she realizes that maybe she is more important to this operation than initially seemed at first, which again is another kind of like fringe thing where like at first it all seems incidental, but then like it couldn't be anybody but Walter, Olivia, and Peter who are doing this. Like they all become very integral to the whole way the story plays out. So again, this is not just some random agent who happened to cross paths. Madsen is very important. And one of the things that happens early on when she meets, I keep just wanting to call him Hurley, when she meets Soto, is that she talks about how her grandfather was a guard at Alcatraz. And she says his name. The second she says his name, the look on Soto's face is telling us he was not a guard at Alcatraz. He was an inmate. And by the time this episode ends, not to jump too far ahead, there is the moment where she sees Hauser's whole operation with all of the inmates and all of the guards from Alcatraz, their pictures all on the wall. And these are all the people who disappeared, who we can expect will be probably coming back sometime. And she notices Thomas Madsen on the wall, inmate. And she's like, that's my grandfather. And then she looks at it closer. And how are you feeling as she's taking a look at this and we realize that the guy she was chasing 3 months earlier that caused her partner to do a header off the roof was her own grandfather. And so obviously these Alcatraz guys have been coming back for at least the last couple of months, and we're only finding out about it now.
Yeah, that was a really nice twist, finding out that the individual that Rebecca was chasing 3 months ago, essentially, and the individual that caused the death of her partner at the time was her grandfather. But I'm interested to see how that's going to play in her ultimate, in her ultimate end game with her grandfather when she does catch up to him. what is she going to do? Is she going to do her duty and is she going to arrest him and send him away to prison again? Or is she going to try and get some answers out of him? And I do want to address something that you sort of hinted at. Hauser, throughout this whole episode, was basically treating Rebecca and Soto like crap, like you said. But I think that Hauser wanted Rebecca and Soto. He needed Rebecca and Soto to discover this shit out by themselves, because if he brought them aboard right away, I think he would have been facing more options or more questions from them. So by telling them to fuck off, it spurred them to go, oh no, this guy's telling me to fuck off. I'm gonna turn halfway around. I'm going to look into it anyway myself, right? It's reverse psychology. So I really love the way that he did that. The other thing, Rebecca was raised by her grandfather, which we meet in a very, very short scene. He's a great character actor. He was in Jackie Brown. I don't know his name, guys. I'm awful with names.
Yeah, Robert Forster, R.I.P.
Thank you. Great. He was a great actor, great character actor. I'm curious to see how Rebecca is going to interact with him now that she knows that he lied to her about her grandfather, or because she got all this information from him because she was raised by him. So I'm interested to see how those dynamics are going to unravel over the next weeks to come. And the other thing is that, why are these prisoners coming back, and who is behind this? So I'm very, very interested to see if we're going to get any of those answers at the end of the 13 episodes, because I really don't think that we're going to get any of them. But I hope that we get some of them, because like I said earlier in this episode, I think the writers of this short-lived series did a great job of setting up the roadmap of what this series could potentially be, and they did a great job at setting up the mystery and and the partnership between Rebecca and Soto. I really, really bought them as partners, and I'm so excited to see them do their thing over the next 13 weeks.
Yeah, I think that's good. And by the end of the episode, they do catch up with Sylvain and they get him and they send him off, and Madsen's like, what happened? And Emerson's like, don't worry about it. He's just gone to jail and he'll be in some random prison. She's like, oh, okay, great. And then we actually see what happened to Sylvain, which is we're in basically what looks like Massive Dynamics version of Alcatraz, right? And we see that he has been brought in and he is put in a cell. First, they kick the shit out of him a little bit. So we realize that this is not a humanitarian mission of any kind. And so Hauser has basically Alcatraz 2. We knew that he had the science wing. He wasn't secretive about that. But this maximum security prison where they're going to keep these inmates, for what purpose and to gather what intel, we still don't quite know. But it feels very Massive Dynamic coded, especially because Fringe, spent so much time with these mad scientists, and this is kind of, the mad guard, because we do find out that Sam Neill's character is one of the young guards that we see in the flashbacks at Alcatraz, that this is where he started his career, was as a guard at Alcatraz. And so he is personally invested because the warden who got murdered was his friend, even though we know that warden was kind of a dick. And so we're trying to figure out what exactly is going on. But it feels like there was some weird shit happening in the past at Alcatraz too, because not everything is on the level there. So was it an intentional, again, was it like a Walter Bishop experiment that someone at Alcatraz was conducting that made all these people disappear? And now is it like the second part of the plan coming together? And how does Hauser fit into this? And what is his plan for the future? And how much of that are they going to reveal here in the first and only 13 episodes? So when this did air, we are talking today just about the first episode, the pilot. They did cram 2 episodes together when they aired it. But they're quite separate individual episodes, so there's not a lot of carryover. So this is just the first, 45-minute chunk. Definitely had me super intrigued. I would say in terms of like a pilot, I would probably give this like an 8 out of 10. It's not quite, obviously like the Lost pilot is 10 out of 10. And even the Fringe pilot is probably like a 9 out of 10. So it definitely seems like they had room to run. But again, it was just such a weird time where Fox was all in on some of this stuff, but then didn't market it well and didn't give stuff a chance to grow and find an audience. How would you rate this first episode, the pilot of Alcatraz?
I think I'm almost right there with you. I would actually rate it a 7 out of 10 because I didn't like the characterization of Jack Sylvain, and I didn't like the way that he was like that he woke up in present day, and I didn't like his characterization in the way that he acted, because he essentially time traveled and he didn't freak out. So that really, really annoyed the shit out of me. But like you said, the reason that he didn't freak out was the fact that he knew that he was going to time travel. But if he knew he was in a time travel, who fucking, who fucking did this, and why did it do this, and what's their grander plan? And also, to move to your point, I think that Hauser has some skeletons in his closet, and he told Rebecca and he told Soto that he's doing this to protect the greater population from some of the most iconic criminals of all time. But I don't think that's it. I think that Hauser was aware of the shady shit happening in Alcatraz in the 60s, and I think Hauser is implicit in some way, shape, or form. So I'm interested to see if in the weeks to come we're gonna see Rebecca and Soto get curious about, Hauser is shady, but is he really on the level, or what's going on here? So I'm interested to see how Hauser is able to dance around these big questions in the weeks to come, especially from Rebecca and Soto.
Yeah, because they're gonna have some questions as more stuff becomes clear, and they start to realize, like you said, these guys aren't panicking. There's not a fish out of water. They knew they were going to time travel in some sort of way. So how and why? And this is a concept that isn't new and had been done before and has been done since, where there was a movie, I think maybe 1990, called Millennium, where like a plane disappeared and then came back a few years later. And that was also a TV show, Manifest, where a plane disappeared and then came back. And so the only main difference with this is that, they're criminals who are coming back, so they have to be stopped because they're inherently bad people. But I definitely think they did a good job of setting up the atmosphere, the broad strokes, the way that this was going to be that coveted, you can watch any episode because it's a mystery of the week, but if you happen to be following along, there is the serialized element. And I just want to say that in the opening scene, as we see a boat come to Alcatraz, the boat does say on the front, Warden Kelvin. And this is not going to be the only Kelvin mention in this show, because, spoiler alert, I already watched the next episode and there's another Kelvin reference in episode 2. So I'm trying to track, maybe this is something, Bad Robot always has a Kelvin reference, JJ's grandfather. So we'll see if that keeps going as we check out all these episodes. But any Bad Robot Easter egg heads in the first minute and a half of the show, you're like, oh, Kelvin, okay, yeah, we're doing it.
I am just very, very excited to see where this story is going to lead, probably to a dead end. That's what we've been dealing with on the show lately, dead ends. But, that's neither here nor there. But I think that'll do it for this edition of Radio 815. Listen, guys, if you like what we do on the show at all, and you want to write us a comment or a question or what have you, we do have an email. It's radio815 at AOL.com. If you send us an email, we'll give you a shout out on the show. That is if you like. That is if we like your question. If you want to catch up on old episodes of our show, we're available on all podcast platforms. We're available on YouTube. We're available everywhere. Just search Radio 15 and we'll pop up. If you want to talk to me about anything about Robot or anything JJ related, I am now officially on Letterboxd. My Letterboxd handle is CreekFanatic88. So come and talk to me, come and follow me, and we'll log some movies together. But Matt, if the folks at home want to do their best to try and find you, where can they do that?
And that is only on Letterboxd, where I am logging movies. Letterboxd.com/MDC3000, because all the other social media platforms just aren't for me anymore, unfortunately.
Until next time, as I often say, we'll talk back soon.
Radio 815 is a Balloonhead Productions presentation in association with Killer Newt Productions.